So we're in your government book. We're in chapter 11 on state and local government. So we just went over the state and local government and how they differ from our central government, which is our federal government. The state and local government, each state of our 50 states, having their own constitution, their own government with executive department, legislative department, and a judicial department. The three branches in each state is similar to our central government, our federal government. So now we're getting into the executive officers. The main executive officer of each state is, of course, the governor. In the United States, the officer of governor is directly descended from the oldest executive officer in American politics, that of the colonial governor. So, and today, governors are very highly respected. It was a great honor. They have gone through a great honor to be chosen, and they have important influence on state administration. Their salary varies wildly, but many of the governors are very well paid. Most have their official residence in the governor mansions, and these mansions that are set forth in each state for the governor. Then they have an expense account that in the midst of all this too. So here's a picture actually of one of the governor mansions. Drumwacket, the official residence of the governor of New Jersey, here located in Princeton. See how beautiful a lot of these governors' mansions are. Now, all of them don't have a mansion, but most states they do. So what about the qualifications of a governor? Qualifications to be a governor. The governor has to be at least 30 years old, United States citizen, of course, and a residence of that state for a period of time. So the state actually sets the time on each governor. Each state may be different. Also, there's informal qualifications too, as basically a governor usually comes from a heavier populated area or city area, is very well known, and appears to appeal to a broad spectrum of voters, especially in very key issues at that time. So if they're supporting some key issues, and the voters have support that governor. Also, the governor, we look at the governor's reputation and character is very important too. The governor, how elected? The governor is directly elected by the people. In 45 states, to be elected, they need what's called a plurality. So what is a plurality? A plurality means just more votes than anyone else. So in 45 states. Now in Arizona, Louisiana, and Georgia, if no candidate wins a majority, then they run off another election with the top two candidates. Now in Mississippi and Vermont, the state legislator, if there's not a majority, the state legislator chooses a winner. So those are the states that do things a little different, the 5 states that do things a little bit differently. But 45 states basically go by a plurality, one of whoever gets the most votes. Candidates that run for governor are chosen either by primaries, which most states have primaries, or by party conventions. And a few states have party conventions, similar to a president running for president, same way the governor is running to be a governor. So basically, let's see, 50% of the states have the governor and the lieutenant governor run as a team. So a lieutenant governor is kind of like a vice president to the president. So, and 50%, but some of the states, they don't. Vermont and New Hampshire, the governor serves for only 2 terms, or 2-year terms, or a 2-year term. So governments in those, they're just like 2 years, every 2 years they elect another governor. But in most states, the governor runs for a 4-year term, similar to the president, 4-year term. Gubernatorial. What's the word gubernatorial mean? It means pertaining to the governor's office. Well, gubernatorial elections are held in the off years from the president of the United States. So whenever we're voting for a president, we're not voting for governors at that time. In half of the states, the number of terms the governor can take is very limited. In half of the states, that they do not limit how long how many terms the governor can hold. So some states it's limited, in other states it's not. The succession of governor, if a governor dies, if a governor resigns or is removed, who succeeds him? Well, in 43 states, of course, the lieutenant governor. Whoever is lieutenant governor will succeed in the governor. But 4 states, the president of the Senate does. The president of the Senate of the state does. And in 3 states, the Secretary of State of the state, Secretary of State, I should say, of that state would. So in 3 states, but in the majority of states, the lieutenant governor would succeed a governor if he would die or resign or removed. A governor can be removed by 2 different ways. If a governor needs to be removed, how can we, the people, remove the governor if he's done something that he should be removed by? So if the legislature removes the governor, the removal is done through the process as known as impeachment. And you know that word impeachment because you think of a president being impeached the same way a governor can be impeached by the legislator. So if the Senate, decides to charge the governor with these charges to impeach, they can go through the House and the Senate impeaching that governor, and they have to basically a certain percent vote in the Senate. But if the voters want to remove him, they can remove the governor by a process that's termed as recall. Recall right here. Recall is basically where you put forth a petition. They put forth a petition with many signers, and then as the signers, if they have enough on the petition, they can vote for recall. And recalls and impeachments, there haven't been very many with governors. In fact, Governor of Illinois, Governor Rod Blagojevich is his name, was impeached in 2009. Here's a picture of his impeachment. Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, how do you say that name? Blagojevich speaks in front of the Illinois Senate regarding his possible impeachment for attempting to sell a vacant United States Senate seat. He was going to sell a Senate seat. Well, anyway, he was impeached. Now, as for recall, there have been a lot of recalls, but only 2 of the 18 states that have recall have ever removed governors from office. Governor Lynn J. Frazier was recalled by the voters of North Dakota in 1921. And then in 2003, Governor Gray Davis of California was recalled. So we have had a couple recalls. So let's go over some of the powers and duties of the governor. First of all, like the President of the United States, a governor can play different roles. And some of his roles are similar to what a president would, but only on a state level. Ceremonial roles, basically to welcome dignitaries to his state from other countries. Also, maybe a ceremony to open a state fair or dedicate new buildings in the state, or to address organizations and groups in that state. Those are ceremonial roles. So governor would be there. Also what we call ex officio. Ex officio means by virtue of office or position. And this basically, the governor can be the head of various boards and commissions because he's governor by virtue of office. His office is ex officio, means that has to do with his office. He's also the chief executive, which basically he doesn't. The power is not as broad as the president, but basically he has a lot of power comparatively to some of the top executives too have power too. So the Secretary of State and the Treasurer are not directly under the governor control, but elected by the people. So that makes the governor not have much power because they were elected. They don't always go by what the governor says. He shares power with other executive officers, some in the opposing party. So he has to compete for power. So governor doesn't have full power like comparatively to like the president. He also basically has important law enforcement powers as executive orders on how a law should be carried out. And he's also over agencies like the Highway Patrol. He's over the Highway Patrol. And also law enforcement, when you think of the governor. To say the governor basically is over the state police department. And the state police department is the governor's military power. He's also the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard. And so this National Guard is superseded only by the President of the United States. In fact, the case is, let me go on to the next page so I can show you here. So, in fact, there was a case, this is not the case here, but there was a case where in 1957 where the governor of Arkansas, Oval Phobos, actually was his name, he ordered the National Guard to prevent these 9 black students to enter Little Rock High School. And then President Eisenhower ordered the National Guard oppositely to ensure their safety instead of ordering them to prevent them. So, of course, the President of the United States is going to be more powerful in this decision in the National Guard. Here it had two commands. Of course, they would take the command of the President of the United States over the governor of Arkansas. So you can see how that happens. But anyway, the governor also has fiscal powers. Those are powers to draw up an annual budget or a biannual budget for the state, and then to present this budget to the legislators so that they can make any changes in the budgets. And the governor sets forth these fiscal powers. Also, the governor has legislative powers, 3 different legislative powers. Let's see. 3 important legislative powers listed here. They may recommend legislation to their state legislators, recommend bills, and they may call special sessions of the legislator. And in all cases, except North Carolina, they can veto acts passed by the legislator. The big power is the veto power. So vetoing these acts passed, they have a special type of veto. Most of the states do not have what's called a pocket veto. Remember we talked about the president had a pocket veto. Basically, if they just ignored the bill and then the legislator adjourned, then basically that bill would just be vetoed. But they don't have that. Instead, if the governor ignores the bill will just naturally become a law. So that's quite different. They also have what's called an item veto. The item veto basically gives power to part of the bill, power to veto part of the bill without vetoing the entire bill. And this applies especially to bills that have to do with spending or bills that appropriation bills, that's what they called. And those are the bills that have to do with giving money and certain spending money. And maybe they don't want to spend as much money, so they can veto part of the bill. Okay? So in no state does the governor hold absolute veto, though, because the legislative department of the state can override his veto. So he doesn't really have as much veto power as thought, but he can veto, and he can item veto parts of bills, and which is really different from the President of the United States. Cannot do that. So probably because there's a lot of bills that come forth that have to do with money. Judicial powers. What kind of judicial powers does the governor have? First of all, the governor has power to appoint state judges in some states. And that's a big power, to appoint their judges. Another is to extradite accused criminals, or to turn over criminals that have ran from one state to another state, and to bring those criminals back to their state so that they can face charges in their state. So that's extradite. So the governor has power to do that. The governor also has clemency powers, and these powers are towards convicted criminals. This is a big deal, because basically a governor can pardon an offender. So if a convicted criminal is to go as the convicted criminal to go to jail or something, basically the governor can pardon, flee from legal responsibilities for that crime, pardoning him. The governor can also grant a reprieve. That's a temporary postponement of a sentence given. The governor also can commute, and that's reduce a sentence by the court. And also a governor can parole a prisoner to free that prisoner before his sentence is complete. So these are clemency parties. Just remember, these clemency powers are very important. Just remember: pardon, reprieve, commute, and parole. Pardon, to free from legal responsibility; reprieve, a temporary postponement of the sentence; commute, to reduce a sentence; and power to parole a prisoner to free him before his complete sentence has been served. So these are clemency. Remember the word clemency. So let's go on. Here's a picture of New Jersey Governor Chris Christie inspects his state's National Guard. Part of the governor's responsibility to look over his National Guard military of the state. Other executive officers beside the governor. So there's 6 more top officials, and most of these are elected by the voters, independent of the governor. So some are not independent, but most are independent of the governor. They vary between states. So let's go over some of these other executive officers. Most states have a lieutenant governor. So what does the lieutenant governor do? Well, first of all, a lieutenant governor is elected, and his duties are similar to a vice president, because he presides over the Senate of the state and serves as an acting governor if the governor is out of state, or the governor, if anything happens to the governor, he succeeds. If there's a vacancy there, he acts as governor. So that's an important position. The next is the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State, except for Alaska and Hawaii and Utah, the Secretary of State is very important. The Secretary of State runs for popular election. We vote for them. And sometimes they're chosen by the governor or legislature, but mainly by popular vote. The Secretary of State, you think of secretary, well, the secretary keeps records and documents and keeps charge of the state seal and administers the election laws. Basically, secretary is basically keeping records, right? Okay, another top executive is the Attorney General. What does Attorney General do? Attorney General basically gives legal advice to the governor and other state officials. The Attorney General is elected by popular election. Some are appointed by the governor, though. And it basically states in the states as a chief prosecutor, representing states in suits brought against states. So if there's a court case against a state, the Attorney General will represent that state, that specific state. So just think of an Attorney General as the top lawyer of the state. Another top official is the treasurer. The treasurer basically is the guardian of the state funds, or the tax collector. Basically, the treasurer makes payments out of the state treasury as authorized payments and disperse the funds, and also invests the tax money into the certain bank investments. So the treasurer, very important when it comes to taxes. On to the auditor, or the comptroller. They work with the treasurer because they see that the funds were spent properly, to make sure the treasurer is doing his job. Some states have both treasurer and auditor, and some states don't, depending. So those are some of the top. We have Lieutenant Governor, we went over, Secretary of State, Attorney General, Treasurer. So, and then auditor or comptroller. Every state has an officer also who operates the public school system. And this person is usually called the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Superintendent of Schools, or the Commissioner of Education. So, other states have a few added officers, added executives. The State Highway Commissioner would be one, the Commissioner of Agriculture another. But many of these functions are handed down by boards or commissions instead. Rather than a single commissioner, they'll have a board of commissioners, or a state board of board members to run that position. Some of these are the State Board of Prisons, the State Board of Education, the Board of Agriculture, the State Board of Health, the Board of Medical Examiners, the Highway Commission, the Department of Conservation, and each state has a DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. And usually those are departments. So those are all of the executive officers. Next, we're going to get into the legislative branch of each state. This is just kind of going through similar, and you can see how, they kind of are parallel to the national government, the federal government, and similar to them. So let's go over some of these review questions. Number 1. What is the oldest executive office in American politics? The governor, right? The governor goes back in the colonial days. Basically, the colonies had governors before we were declared our independence. They had governors that would govern them, each colony from England. They'd usually be picked actually by Great Britain at that time. So the governor goes back, the oldest executive office. How long is the term for a state governor in most states? Most states it is 4 years, 4-year term. Number 3, over what group does the governor exercise power of Commander-in-Chief? Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard. Number 4, what type of veto power do most governors possess? The veto power that they possess that's unique is called the item veto. And that's where they can veto parts of a bill, especially if it's a financial bill. And they can say, well, I don't really agree with this part of the bill, giving this money here or there. And it's basically called an item veto. This is the veto power. They also do have veto power, but the the Senate actually can override the governor's veto power. On to number 5. List several clemency powers held by most governors. What's clemency power? That's the power to pardon someone who has committed a crime or be convicted of a crime. And some of these powers, clemency powers, are to pardon. There's 4 of them. Pardon was free from legal responsibility, or reprieve, and that's a temporary postponement for them to go to prison or just to postpone their sentence. Commute means to reduce the sentence, and parole means to free a prisoner before their sentence is up. Those 4 things. So, okay, that's about it for the executive branch. And now we're going to get into, in the next video, into the, as you see, into the legislative part of the state legislators, of the state governments. So we're going on to that, and then we'll go on to the judicial branch of the states, and you'll see how all of these are pretty similar to the United States government, but you'll see some specific differences. So, okay, let's end it there.